This just doesn't make any sense. How can this be possible? Officer Declan searched through another box of files. He stood up and looked through his notes again. Officer Declan worked overnight whenever a mystery like this showed up, giving up his breaks and skipping out on meals. His only focus would be to find the light at the end of the tunnel. Officer Declan wasn't always so dedicated to his work. He was an ordinary police officer. But it was ever since he stumbled upon an unusual case that something changed him. Or rather, motivated him to get to the end of every mystery that came his way. Some years back, BIIPD was on a hunt to locate a serial killer that had been on the loose around the coastal regions of Southern California. One after the other, random people, often those who were taking a nightly walk or returning from work to home, were found lifeless in a horrible condition in the woods. The police were suspecting the killer's modus operandi was that he attacked at night and attempted to dispose of the remains in deserted places. At a time like this, a group of residents from the small town of San Clemente arrived at the station. They all had one complaint to make, and that was against one of their neighbors that they found highly suspicious. When they first moved into the house, we thought of them as decent people. They didn't speak much to us and usually kept to themselves, but every now and then we did talk to them before it stopped in totality in the past few months, which raised all the more suspicion. There is a couple who lives there, the husband, Nolan Becker, and the wife, Ivania Becker. They both worked for BII Pharmaceuticals. They were scientists. They were a very sweet couple, but there were some things worth mentioning about their relationship. Despite being such a learned woman, we don't know if Ivania Becker was gullible or just madly in love with her husband. It seemed that she would agree with whatever her husband said, be that right or wrong. She always took his side. She always stood by him, and although this sounds like a desirable trait in a wife, it was sometimes a little annoying. There was no way to share a different opinion with the man, but that his wife would defend his side. But like we said, in the past few months, something strange has been going on in that house. And we have calculated it to be ever since these mysterious crimes have been taking place. It wasn't only that Ivania was overly attached to her husband, but her husband was overly possessive about her, or so we thought. We recently have been hearing strange noises from the Becker's house, most likely from his basement, sometimes during the day and sometimes at night. When it starts, it goes on for hours. We tried to ask Nolan where the noises were coming from and what was it about. But he always refused, saying he was unaware of what we were talking about, which was a straight-out lie. Perhaps on many occasions we missed out on the noises during the day, but when it occurred at night, we heard them clearly. There is no doubt about it. We tried to get to the bottom of this, but Nolan rarely allows anyone to enter his property on any excuse. As a matter of fact, he doesn't even open his door without the chain lock. Officers, we know for sure Nolan Becker is hiding something. We're even having doubts that Nolan may be involved with what is going on in Southern California. Asking Ivania is of course of no use. She won't say anything against her husband. Perhaps she knows something, but she's in denial. She doesn't want to give in her husband. Officers, you must investigate this matter. The very same evening, BIIPD arrived at the Becker's residence with a search warrant. Nolan Becker had no choice but to allow the police in. Ivania Becker wasn't home. Mr. Becker, where is your wife? She's not home. She's gone out to run some errands. I see. I hope you're aware that the neighboring people have been complaining about strange noises that have been coming from your property. That is nothing but blind hatred. These people have always been a little envious of me, so they enjoy to give me a hard time. I assure you the noises are not from here." The police crew walked around the house. Nothing suspicious seemed to be found. "If there is nothing to hide, you shouldn't have a problem opening up your basement door for us." "There's nothing there, just the broiler, the plumbing supplies, things like that." When the police pushed Nolan into unlocking his basement, he suddenly became quite defensive and refused opening it up. Although the police had not heard any noises so far, Nolan's behavior was highly suspicious. The police broke down the basement door against Nolan's wishes. They were shocked to find Ivania Becker chained up in the darkness of the room. She wasn't in her senses. Ivania was scrunched up to the corner, scraping the concrete walls with her fingernails. Nolan was immediately put into handcuffs, and Ivania was brought out to safety. Seeing her condition, the police made arrangements to send her to a rehabilitation center, and Nolan into custody for interrogation. As Nolan was brought to the police van in handcuffs, people came out of their homes. They began murmuring and alleging him. "We knew you were up to something. What kind of a man are you? Who treats a woman like that?" His wife always supported him. Did he not feel any love for a woman like that? Yes, Ivania loved him. I guess it was one-sided. How could he do that? Nolan Becker became enraged. He shouted back to the people, "You fools! You think I don't love my wife? I protected her all these days. I protected all you fools. If there was anyone that loves Ivania, it was me. You people have no clue what you have done, and now you will suffer the consequences." He then looked at the skies, darkening by the minute. Will she be able to handle it? There's not much time till it begins. I don't know what calamity will fall on us tonight. As his wife Ivania was taken out by the paramedics, she tried to run to her husband. She screamed, "Why are you taking him? Let him go! Nolan! He did nothing!" Ivania was going insane. She became violent and tried to hurt the people around her to free her husband. It was confirmed that Ivania was out of her senses. It took about 4 people to get her inside the van. Nolan became quiet. He looked heartbroken and devastated. "Ivania, stay strong," he shouted as he sat down in the police van. Nolan and Ivania met when they started working for BII Pharmaceuticals. They were the perfect match for each other. They not only connected intellectually, but they bonded emotionally. It wasn't only that Ivania always stood by Nolan's side, but Nolan dearly loved her as well, and despite what people might have assumed, Nolan would do anything for Ivania. The couple soon got married, and they were living a happy life in their own home in San Clemente. Since they worked together, they often combined their research work and collaborated on projects. It was one day, at their workplace, that Nolan and Ivania heard that a few scientists that were sent to Alaska for a project had been covered by a huge avalanche that occurred there. With the horrible ongoing blizzard at that time, there was no way to contact them, and when a few days had gone by, people had very little hope of their survival. Ivania was worried. She knew the scientists that were chosen for the project: Edward, James, Colton, and Elizabeth. Ivania was very close with Colton. They had gone to the same university and had a very cordial relationship, and over the years of working together at BII Pharmaceuticals, Ivania came to admire Colton's passion and dedication as a scientist. She looked up to him. Fortunately, nearly 3 weeks after the company received the tragic news, one morning they received a call from Alaska informing everyone that James and Elizabeth had passed away, but Edward and Colton were rescued. When Colton returned to California, Ivania went to visit him. Seeing that Colton was awfully sick and knowing that he had no one to take care of him, Ivania often went to his house to help out. It was during this time that suddenly something strange happened to Ivania. She wasn't like before. Nolan started to suspect her. He was devastated just thinking whether Ivania was cheating on him. Could she really do that to him? But soon, Nolan discovered the truth behind the matter. He immediately forbade Ivania to visit Colton anymore. The root of the problem was Colton. Colton had survived and returned, but he hadn't returned alone. He brought with himself something despicable, a contamination. Colton wasn't the man he used to be. He was different. He was vicious. He was vengeful. He sought for himself something vile and gruesome. Ivania had been contaminated with bad blood. Colton's contaminated blood. It had changed her. She suddenly started to have urges to devour meat, raw meat. She had an insatiable hunger that suddenly arose, and by every passing day, the urges were becoming more frequent as the contamination spread throughout her body. She desired to feast on flesh to quench her thirst with blood. And in the midst of being exposed to this shocking truth, Nolan was horrified to discover Colton wasn't alone. He not only contaminated Ivania, but he contaminated a group of people he considered his own. People who had become rogue and evil. And Ivania was supposed to be one of them. This vicious group preyed on innocent people for their satisfaction. Nolan knew his wife. Ivania would never serve an evil cause, but now that she was infected, she couldn't help it. This was when remains were being discovered along the coastal cities and spreading over a larger area of Central California. Ivania asked for his help. Nolan understood her weakness. He wasn't fearful of her. He didn't despise her or be disgusted of her nature. Nolan loved Ivania, and he would do whatever it took to save her, to stop her from committing injustice. Nolan figured alternatives to satisfy Ivania's hunger. Sometimes he would bring her raw animal meat. He would take her hunting into the woods in the darkness of the night. And on really bad circumstances, when they were left with no choice, Nolan took her to the graveyard. But when Nolan couldn't make any arrangements, he had to do what was necessary, and usually, as those painful hours passed by, Ivania's urges would subside. Ivania knew herself this was what had to be done. Every time her urges for eating flesh arose, and she started to go rogue, untamable, Nolan bound her, locked her in confinement for her safety, and for everyone else's safety. Officer Declan was in the van among the crew, and Nolan. He kept checking Nolan through the rearview mirror. Nolan was quiet. He held his head and looked out the window. He was temporarily locked up in the jail cell at the station until he would be brought to the interrogation room. But something bizarre occurred at the rehabilitation center that night. A criminal had broken loose in the center and was wreaking havoc on the people. But all were saved because of a woman named Ivania. She unleashed herself on the man. It was a horrific sight to watch. By the time the staff arranged backup security guards, they found the man lifeless on the ground, in a dreadful condition. Ivania was gone. She had fled, but if it wasn't for her that night, many more would have lost their lives. Upon getting the news, the crew at the station immediately sent to check up on Nolan. But when they got to the cell, it was empty. The locks were broken. Nolan had escaped. It was ever since then that Officer Declan became dedicated to similar cases as such. He understood that this couldn't be the work of any human being. This was much more than that. This was some sort of creature. Whatever it was, Officer Declan was determined to hunt it down. You couldn't have done this alone. I know you two are together. And now, I just need to find out where. Nolan, are you okay? I'm fine, Ivania. We have to get you to safety. Are you sure you'll be able to handle it? I don't have to worry about anything when you're with me. I know you'll be there to help me. I find my strength in you. You are what keeps me fighting. Officer Declan, come on. Let's head down to the cafeteria. Let's take a break. I'll pass. I have a lot of work to do. I think I'm onto something. You're keeping yourself under too much pressure, Declan. Take it easy. No, Pete. I have to solve this. Click on the subscribe button and check out more awesome videos on our channel. And don't forget to press the bell icon because you know it's interesting.